Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Professional Care Workers Week and a panel today on diversity, inclusion, equality, hosted by the Care Workers Charity. My name is Sanjay Drona. I'm from the Close Care Home in Burcott, Oxfordshire. And I guess I tick a couple of boxes. So I'm an out and proud LGBTQ+ man. And I identify within the BAME spectrum as well. So I bring some knowledge and some learnings from my own experience in the sector to this. And I hope that we can have a really amazing conversation today about the sector and where we can learn and what we can do. With me, I've got Clenton and Ginger. Clinton comes to us from Think Local Act Personal, and Ginger's from the Equality and Human Rights Commission. I'm going to allow both of them to introduce themselves also, so we can get into that, and then we've got some sort of panel topics and suggestions and questions that we've already worked on. So Clinton, if I can hand over to you to introduce yourself, that would be awesome.
Thank you, and good morning to everyone. My name's Clenton Farqhuarson, and I'm the chair of Think Local Act Personal, which is a partnership of about 50 organisations nationally. And our remit looks at personalisation in health and social care, but also looking at co-production. But to provide some context in terms of my personal story, I'm a Black disabled man who draws on health and social care. I employ my own personal assistant. I also manage my mother's personal budget on her behalf. And in the past, when I first became disabled, a social worker changed my life and enabled me to get back on track. I have a number of long-term conditions which require regular contact with my GP and regular trips to hospital outpatients. But the roles that I am really proud of are I'm also a husband, father, friend, and neighbour. And I love sport. I work, pay tax, and I cannot abide Brussels sprouts. So that's me.
That's awesome. Thank you. I'm not sure if I agree with the Brussels sprouts thing because I think they're fantastic. Whenever you come to the Close, I'm going to make sure that we get the chefs to prepare them our way because you'll be astounded. Only with your consent, of course, will we put them on your plate. Ginger, can I ask you to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, my name is Ginger Wiegand. I am an inquiries, right now I'm working as an inquiries lead at the Equality and Human Rights Commission. I've been with the commission for about a year. And during that time, I've been working on, our inquiry into the experiences of lower paid ethnic minority workers in health and social care. Actually, up until about a month ago, I've been working on the Wales team. So this is, but the inquiry itself is a 3 nations project. So I've been working with colleagues across Scotland, England, and Wales in both creating the inquiry and in its publication and the follow-up on it. So what I'd like to do today is share with you some of the findings from our inquiry, maybe I know our inquiry, our recommendations, and maybe share some of the responses that we've had from some of the organizations that we've provided recommendations for. Also would like to make the point that though the inquiry itself focused on ethnic minority worker experiences, we know, that social care workers are predominantly female. I think 82% of social care workers in England are women. And we think that our findings, the findings and some of the recommendations we have, are really relevant to workers in different groups, including different protected characteristics. And we think that they're relevant across different sectors as well. So yeah, that's a bit of the framing for kind of where I'm coming from today. Brussels sprouts. Yeah, I'm a fan of Brussels sprouts. I had never had Brussels sprouts before I immigrated to this country from North America 12 years ago. But now I do understand that they are Christmas food. I did not understand that before coming to this country.
A Brussels sprout is not just for Christmas, Ginger.
Well, I need to expand my horizons then.
So with that, if we actually, I think, to be honest, that's a perfect segue into the report and what you learn. I know we're jumping right back in with you, but I really think that that's super interesting. So why don't you tell us about what the report was, what came out of it, and where we sit with the equality of with the commission?
Sure. I'll give you a brief run through. Kind of, I'll hit upon a brief run through right now. I'll explain why we conducted the inquiry, how it went, and then what were the primary findings and a summary of our recommendations. And then maybe we can get into a bit more detail in our conversation along the way. So why did we conduct this inquiry? We knew that lower paid workers in health and social care generally had greater exposure to COVID-19 than workers in other sectors. We launched the inquiry in 2020 to explore the treatment and experiences of these workers in health and social care. And we set out to examine the following areas: the number of hours worked, workplace policies, procedures, and culture, what kind of tasks people were allocated, the ability of workers to access redress, and then also training and development opportunities. We had 5 main findings within the inquiry. So we found incomplete data. So especially in social care and in adult social care, a lack of robust data on this group of workers. Yeah, and we thought that that really had implications for understanding the experiences of those workers. So what we really would like to see is that we understand who is in the workforce, and that is in terms of who is in the workforce in relation to, say, the demographics and protected characteristics, but also what are the experiences of workers in the workforce. And we actually, you know, if there are any people from public bodies, commissioning bodies or regulators in there, we would talk about public sector equality duty. And we think that it's really important to have data on the workforce in order to be able to comply with the public sector equality duty. I'll save any other comment for that until later. But we did find that there were different treatments and experiences at work for ethnic minority workers. Just to say as well, sorry, a really quick caveat, how did we find out what we say our findings are? Well, it was, we did commission some independent research. We did some systematic literature review. We commissioned some academics to do some systematic literature reviews for us. We looked at what was already known about social care workers, about the workforce. We also did focus groups with workers, did an online survey with workers, and then we also, and that was across England, Scotland, and Wales. And then we also engaged stakeholders. So that would have been people who represented regulators. We primarily engaged umbrella bodies when we engaged stakeholders, because as you know, the social care landscape is so fragmented. To have gone to individual providers would have been very complicated. So we depended on those umbrella bodies for voices, both in terms of, you know, bodies like ADSS and bodies like, I'm going to use an example from Wales right now, sorry, Care Homes Wales, and the equivalent in England and Scotland as well. So just to caveat that, that's the basis for our findings. The second finding we found was different treatment and experiences at work. So we did find that ethnic minority workers talked about discrimination, harassment, and experiences of discrimination, harassment, and abuse. They did talk about less favorable treatment from managers. We did find that included overrepresentation in disciplinary procedures, but also people talked about allocation of hours. And there was some particularly for disciplinary, there was some support in both the literature and the focus groups and qualitative, evidence gathering that we undertook. We did find that there were fewer training opportunities and lack of representation in senior roles, and that was particularly true in adult social care, lack of ethnic minority people in senior roles, and increased risk in the workplace. I'm just going to give you a quote because I actually really do love quotes. I've experienced and witnessed bullying, racism, and victimization from staff and managers. I kept some of my experiences to myself, and I have complained about to management. Unfortunately, it's always led to the same result. Nothing gets done. It's frustrated, and you're made to look like a troublemaker. That was just one of the quotes from a worker in a focus group. We did find, and I'll wrap up, I promise I'll wrap up in 3 minutes here. Sanjay, I promise. We did find that commissioning and outsourcing was leading to insecure work. So we did find that there were more 0 hours contracts in frontline social care. Ethnic minority staff did tend to be overrepresented in lower paid, commissioned out and outsourced role. Just to note, I know we're talking about social care today, but outsourcing in healthcare was more common in England and less common. And we did find some good practices as well. Like for instance, the Welsh government and the Scottish government both have kind of guaranteed the real living wage for certain, for social care workers, those workers who are providing direct care. And also there are some, in Scotland and Wales, there were some really positive regulations around 0 hours contracts, and I'll save that in case you want to get more detail later.
Oh, absolutely.
All right, okay, great. Okay, we did find low awareness of rights, so workers were often unaware of their rights. This was a really pronounced, particularly for home care workers, and we're putting this down to kind of the fragmentational nature of the social care landscape. Those were some of the barriers to workers understanding their rights. It was a particular issue for migrant workers as well. Finding number 5, this is the final finding. We did find that workers were afraid of raising concerns, and there was a lack of mechanisms for them to do so. And workers were afraid that one of the fears was that they might lose their jobs, kind of like, it was a combination. So workers were afraid that, rocking the boat might put them, they were afraid of victimization potentially. And we did find examples of that. But also for migrant workers, who were afraid that their work positions, their visas might be tied. That might be actually more relevant in healthcare than in social care, but we're afraid that their visas might be tied, to their work, might be afraid of making complaints. But then there was also a lack of confidence that actually anything would change if they voiced concerns or made complaints. Just really quickly, an overview of our recommendations for change. Our recommendations are aimed at governments, local authorities, NHS providers, and health and social care regulators. So we would like to see strong leadership from governments in ensuring that health and social care and commissioning bodies, such as local authorities, to make sure that employers meet the public sector equality duty, improved awareness and compliance with employment rights. We want to see accessible ways for workers to raise concerns, and also to see kind of an understanding of what barriers for certain groups of workers might be, and to really try to crash those barriers and make sure that all workers have a way to raise concerns and input into the workplace. We'd like to see mandatory training for managers to deal with workforce complaints, particularly complaints that relate around bullying, harassment, and protected characteristics. We do have some recommendations for the UK government in terms of for BASE as well, the department that is really in charge of workplace conditions, regulations, and enforcement. And we would like to see develop national structures for better data collection on the health and social care workforce. And that's about, I said, understanding who's in the workforce and what is happening, what's their experience in the workforce. And that is it from now for me. So.
Thank you so much, because that really informs me, and I hope everyone that this reaches about what the Equality and Human Rights Commission are working on and why is it important, and actually what we can gain out of it. Clenton, this comes back then to say we're doing this work, but what is, in essence, what's the output that we can then see? Because the world is very aware, it's very woke. We've got a lot of understanding about people who are diverse, people that work for us. But why is it still important to ensure that as providers and as people that work within the sector, that we really do make sure that we live our values around diversity, equality, and inclusion? Why is it important in today's day and age?
It has been important for many years now, ever since the post-war immigration Britain has continued to become more diverse in its makeup. My own parents came over on the Windrush generation, and these patterns of immigration have changed our society and have implications for people who need care and support and those who work in health and social care. And the same goes for disability, where hard-fought rights to independent living has gained acceptance, although my view, there is still a long way to go before these rights are routinely experienced by people. We also have seen the struggle for LGBTQ rights and women equality. And more recently, we've been seeing cultural change movements such as Black Lives Matter and the Me Too movement. And increasingly for me, we should avoid looking at equality, diversity and inclusion through a single lens. And not everyone is the same for sure, but many people face multiple disadvantage and exclusion. So we need to think about and act upon these issues in more joint up way. And what comes to my mind is Audre Lorde's quote that sums this up very clearly for me. And she says, there's no such thing as a single issue struggle, because we don't live single issue lives. And this sometimes is referred to as intersectionality. And we also need to see the difference between equality and equity. And we should, of course, be promoting people being more equal through opportunity and access to that opportunity, and understanding the consideration to that opportunity, because we all are starting from different starting points. But it doesn't mean for me that treating everyone the same, and understanding we need to think about equity and what that word means, and what does that mean to the systems we create, what does it mean to the services that we provide. And if we are to achieve better outcomes for marginalised individuals and communities, we have to, I believe, recognise equity, that no one is starting from the same place, and that there are barriers which mean many people experience multiple disadvantage and exclusion. So we need to think about equity as well as that of how inequality can be addressed. And if anyone's interested on that, I did a blog on, equality and equity isn't straightforward, and it's on the Think Local Act Personal website if anyone's interested. And I know Ginger mentioned about the importance of legislation and policy such as the Equality Act, which aims to reduce discrimination in society. But if we look closer to home in social care, we've got the Care Act 2014, which I believe provides a vital basis for social care based on supporting people's well-being, providing support that is personalised to each person, and establishing social attitudes, and also providing the environment and context for what care and support is provided and how. And all of those that work in social care, from those who undertake the direct work with people to all the leaders, it needs a good understanding of diversity and equality and in the inclusion issues, and should be able to reflect this in what they do and how they do it. And it should start with knowing about legislation and policy with the amount of detail appropriate to the level and type of role, but always avoiding that tick box, learning by numbers approach. For example, it needs to go further beyond knowing dates of various religious festivals, even though that it's important, don't get me wrong, but knowing about equality and diversity and inclusion is one thing. However, understanding equality, diversity and inclusion is another thing. And for me, each is a distinct mindset involving critical thinking. And I would like for this to work to point to a support system that is fairer, more inclusive, relationship-based, and above all, should be more human. And to provide good quality and equitable social care for everyone, I believe is essential that we start with the person, what matters most to them, but also understanding the workforce, what matters most to them, and so that we can care for each other and support each other, and which is tied up in their lives and our lives and their history, their identity, you know, their home, their place, and their culture. And that's, for me, sums up, you might have heard of Making It Real, which is think local, that personal way that we produce to provide a compass for what good personalised care and support looks like through a series of I and we statements. And an I statement describes what people should expect from care and support. And a we statement describes what organisations need to do and make happen. But I think we could use that in diversity and equality and inclusion. What are the I statements from the perspective of the workforce? You know, and what is the I and we statements to reflect how we've heard? But you know, and an I statement in Making It Real talks about I have care and support that enables me to live as I want to, and see me as a unique person with skills, strengths, and a personal goal. And you know, for me, that is ultimately what Making It Real is trying to do, and that's why diversity, equality, and inclusion is really important from that perspective.
What I hear from listening to both of you is that, first of all, that bit about equality to our team, so using my lens as a provider and listening to amazing advocates for policy and understanding, I hear that what I need to do is, first of all, understand that actually equality isn't a flat line. Weirdly, it means that, does this mean that what I should be doing is starting off looking at it's about the finish line, not the starting line, I think, because if I level everyone out at the starting line, it doesn't mean that they're all going to get to the same point. What I have to do is understand that my team have complexities and differences and those independences, which we're so good at acknowledging and seeing in our residents or the people that we provide care for, but not necessarily in that 360 perspective. So it's about holding up a mirror to our own services and our own practices to make sure that that diversity, equality, and inclusion is level to the individual, not level to the service. And that's where we can really boost up from, because through that, we'll be able to achieve that amazing team who are empowered, confident, and also responsible for delivering phenomenal care to then the people who we care for. The other thing that I think that was really interesting, Clenton, that you raised is this lip service issue that sometimes exists within the sector. It's okay. It's Black History Month. Boom! I put up a poster, right? That's me done, right? That's all I have to do. I've put up a poster. Great. It's in the lobby. Now, what am I doing about that, and how am I acting upon that to make sure that that is fairly reflected in the culture and in the society and in our community within the care home? That's a big pitfall that we sometimes face, and we've seen that and we've learned from it to make sure that we don't end up in a lip service situation. But in that, hearing about sort of areas that we can improve, have Ginger, from your reports and from what you've read and what you've written, obviously, and been part of, are there any amazing successes, or obviously not naming organizations, obviously where it's appropriate, but are there great working practices that we providers and the sector as a whole can learn from, or is there something that was phenomenal? Let's celebrate a little bit of success around diversity and inclusion, and see where there was something. Have you got any examples? Clinton, be ready, I'm coming to you next.
Yes. So I think some of the examples, and I think some of the examples are in the report. And also, just to say, we've put a link to the report in the chat here for you. I would encourage everybody to go and read it. There's a full report which has all the findings, and there are also policy briefings specific to England, which hones in on the key recommendations for public bodies in England, but also for UK government. I think just thinking of some of the good practice examples. So we did have some, a lot of there are good practice examples, both in terms of like at all levels, really, because we're talking about different levels. There's UK-wide government policy, which is applicable here, but there's also the devolved policy in relation to social care specifically, so that national level policy. And then there's also more local level. So just a couple. We had heard of some local authorities which were requiring, this is an NHS example, but in one we had heard, okay, sorry, I'll stick to local authorities. We had, sorry about this, guys. my mind is ping-ponging. We've had local authority workplaces that have done things like buddy systems, I think, to bring new workers on and have that like proper induction into the workplace. We have heard that proper inductions, because I think particularly in social care, and especially, maybe perhaps with home care, there was an issue of, workers feeling very, very isolated. And so having buddy systems or having proper inductions would help. Obviously there is the example of Welsh government, as a nation deciding that, well, we think that social care workers should get paid the real living wage, and they have funded that and have made sure that actually started rolling out in April 2022. We do know that during the pandemic we also know that during the pandemic that workers did really appreciate the sort of lift up payment. I'm forgetting the exact name that it was given in policy, but the stipends that were given, to social care workers. I believe that that happened in various of the three nations. In terms of individual, yes, I think there have been different mechanisms for making sure that workers have a say in the workplace. Unionization has, seen, I think that we've had, I think there are stakeholders who talked about that in the report and made distinctions between the fact that there's more unionization in the NHS versus than there is in social care and adult social care. What I would say though about that and about best practice, if I could just say a couple things generally. Yeah, we do think that there's not a one size fits all solution to all organizations. And I think you asked me, one of the questions that you asked us to prepare on was, give me one takeaway that everyone can on the call can go now and implement to support their teams from a DE&I perspective. And I talked with the other team members that I have that worked on this inquiry as well. And the consensus was that it was like, it would be know your workforce, know who they are and what their experiences are, and have mechanisms for feedback and support. That came through very, very strongly in the inquiry. But that, and there were different examples of what those mechanisms might be, but acknowledgement that it's important for organizations to understand their workforce and work with their workforce to figure out what that is, but also particularly to figure out what barriers to using those mechanisms might be. And, people with different experiences are going to have different barriers. And it's important to understand. We think it's very important to understand, for instance, particular barriers that migrant workers may have in terms of language, or barriers that workers may have in terms of access to technology for, participating in those workplace exchanges.
Brilliant. Thank you, Ginger. There's a question that I have that follows on from that, but I'll come back to you after we've heard from Clenton.
I think fundamentally, when we talk around diversity, equality, and inclusion, for me, it's more around the narrative, the story we're trying to tell. And the example I use to describe this is, Martin Luther King didn't start his speech, I have a dream, with, I have a complaint. What he started was to paint the picture of the vision that was for all of us to come into. So for me, when I talk about diversity, equality, inclusion, it's about our dreams, it's about our wishes, it's about our aspirations. So we have what is the story we are trying to tell in society? At the moment, the story that we tell in society about diversity, equality, inclusion, it's all about legislation. We start with legislation. It's about our aspirations. And they shouldn't be blighted from whatever protected characteristic that might be associated with me. So for me, it's the narrative for society. We have to do better. But also understanding if the narrative is about our dreams, our wishes, and our aspirations to do everyday things that others take for granted because of the protected characteristics that you might have, how have we set up systems in society, and also how have we created services that enable us truly to be who we are? Mm-hmm. Those are some of the things fundamentally we need to have those conversations. But I would go on to answer your question that, for me, I'm going to be a bit cheeky and mention a couple of promising examples from my own neck of the woods. And that would be, at Think Local, at Personal, we created the Black and Asian Minority Ethnic Report, which you may have, or which you might be familiar with. And also, I would like to mention about my own company, which is Community Navigator Services, CIC, the work that we're doing in the space of diversity, equality, and inclusion. But firstly, the Black and Asian Minority Ethnic Report, as with many other reports that TLAC have done, and this came about with the concerns when it became clear about COVID-19 was having a disproportionate effect on people from Black and Asian and ethnic minority communities. Our way at TLAC is not to stop at pointing out the problem, but to say something positive about what needs to be done to tackle them. So we commissioned some work to see what we could find out about organisations providing good personalised care and support for people from Black and Asian minority ethnic communities. And we generally didn't know what we would find. You know, we were pleased to have found 14 organisations that were providing great personalised care and support with managers, workers, and volunteers deeply rooted in their communities and local places. We suspect that this is just the tip of the iceberg, that there are many other organisations like them, but too often operating at the edge of formal commissioning. And we call this hidden in plain sight. And the report calls for system leaders to proactively go out and engage with these organisations. And we also think there is much learning that can be taken from these organisations and others like them on how cultural sensitivity support can be provided by all organisations that provide care and support. If you want to know a bit more about it, you can find the report on the Think Local at Personal website. But the example of within the Black and Asian Minority Report was the Takaki Wellbeing based in Birmingham, my own neck of the woods. And it starts out with the mainstream mental health first aid model, but found this didn't work for Punjabi communities. So they have developed their own model of peer support, which is supported by the Sikh faith, you know, and it works by creating a safe and dedicated space through relaxation techniques, open discussions, and mutual support. So people's faith and culture is drawn on as a resource, and dialogues are opened up about male and female identity, sexuality, and what support looks like from different individuals within the Sikh community. Another example from the report, and it's called Irie Minds, based in East London. It intentionally does not have a set way to access its support, as historic problems for the people it works with is the lack of accessibility, you know, to mental health services. The service makes it easy as possible for people to ask for help and get a response when they do so. They work with a person to find out what is going on in their lives and what support will work best for them. You know, feedback from people who draw on the services is that they feel they are valued, and the service recognises that they have something to contribute. Even feeling able to attend daily is important, as some of the people they work with do not find the traditional service offer them this connection. Mm-hmm. And people drawing on support from Irie Minds are involved in aspects of its development and attend regular visioning sessions on how to develop the service. People see the service as a place where they are will be understood culturally. They are involved in recruitment processes. They have been at the heart of the job development, and discussions in recruiting a therapist identified the key qualities that candidate will need. And you can hear the voice of leaders from Ivory Minds and Key are in the report. And there's a podcast that we did that if anyone's interested, it's on the Think Local at Personal. And the last example from my own community navigator services, which is a disabled user-led organisation. And speaking with my local hat on this is that we provide, peer support for people with direct payments and personal budgets in Birmingham. We have just started a programme on equality and diversity and inclusion training with Harry Swell, which is an associate with adult social care teams for Birmingham City Council. And we are looking at how we can upskill everyone in the workforce on cultural competency, and how we are doing this is very important. It's about creating a place, an environment where people feel safe and brave and have honest conversations with each other, which recognises and accepts that people come from different starting points that I mentioned earlier. If you don't do this, you risk leaving people behind when we talk about equality and diversity and inclusion. But also, it also something that requires endeavour to stick with it when we talk about equality, diversity and inclusion. It's a bit like a marathon. You need to prepare your first steps beforehand and pace yourself as you go through. It's that endurance if you're doing a marathon. And at the moment, it's the pilot at this stage, which is right at the beginning. But I'm hoping that this will get some great learning from it, and we're able to talk about the uncomfortable conversations that need to happen under equality and diversity and inclusion.
And that's so right, because we have to be ready to challenge ourselves and do that uncomfortable thing to grow, because it's only through that we'll ever actually achieve. And Clenton, that example that you gave me gave us is actually quite phenomenal, and it really makes me reflect in line with a question that we've kind of received as well about people from different ethnic minorities and different groups. International recruitment is a huge wave that's taking place within the social care space at the moment, obviously with the opening up of the job codes for senior carers and carers at UKVI on the shortage occupation list. And that is having a huge impact on the number of overseas workers coming to the UK, plus the NMC's new recommendation around reducing the IELTS requirements, the English language requirements. That's a whole different ball game. But with all those international people coming in, and even, I've had so far 12 people come in from overseas. And you've just made me think of something that I can actually do immediately when I go back to the office, which is around supporting them in terms of that cultural perspective, which we do quite well in terms of teaching. We spend a lot of time teaching them about our culture within the UK, the language, the dynamic, colloquialisms around language, especially, but it's really interesting that we and I think this as an Asian-owned business, that it's just obvious, but actually we need to bring them into our service a lot more. It's not we're pushing the service upon them. It's what can we do? And actually that example of using their faith and the services around you, that you think that there are systems in place really to support you with this. And it's about providers using them. One last question that I've got, keeping in mind timing as well, because we thought this was going to go on 20 minutes, but we've actually done the full hour nearly, which is brilliant because it's just so vital. And I'm so thankful to you both. There's an element around small providers, which I like to believe that I represent, as we have the one home. but there are large groups as well. And I think this is a really, really relevant point, especially where Ginger, the commission is a beast of an animal. And sometimes looking at this as a small provider, and I know friends who have maybe 3 or 4 homes, and people that work in smaller organizations, what can we do? Small versus large, where's the improvements? Because I can go back and having heard Clenton, and I can take this back to my service and it's enforced tomorrow or within a couple of days. Large providers might take months to get something through their systems. What are your feelings around this? What can you give me on, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think again, and you've actually just hit on one of the pros and cons there. But I think, and again, I sat down with this is also incorporating feedbacks from other colleagues on the team, including colleagues who worked on this the inquiry that I've referred to in the evidence gathering stage. So we think that there is actually okay, well, I'd say that no matter what, whether you're a large organization or a small organization, every organization needs to understand their responsibilities, and that is responsibilities in terms of your legal obligations, as well as, and legal is the lowest bar to set. We'd also encourage those best practice, like to always strive, for best practice, but you need to know what your responsibilities are. I guess, obviously I'm talking from the side of that workforce angle here, but, as an organization in general, when you are providing a service, if that service does do a public function, then you as a provider are responsible for the public sector equality, or whoever is paying you to do that service needs to make sure that you do fulfill that public sector equality duty as well. But what we would say for every organization, know who is working for you, make sure that there's a system in place to capture data, so that you can look out for stress places, so that you might see where there might be less favorable treatment to groups of people in your organization. We think that there are benefits for large providers, and there are benefits for small providers, and larger groups benefits, smaller organizations, like you said, you're smaller, you can push things through faster, but also your workforce may be more stable. Your workforce is going to be smaller, so you might know them better, and might therefore, because you know them better, be better able to support them. Larger organizations may have more resources, might be able to commission training, but then they're also maybe more detached. Like with the larger workforce, you might not know them as well. What every organization needs to understand is, what is your response? Given an understanding of your responsibilities and what you want to achieve, what is your response to that? We also think that, especially for small organizations, that sector networks and work groups would be really helpful, like umbrella bodies of service providers. So home care associations. So we do think that, that it's a matter of figuring out what support is out there, but maybe as well, as a sector and different bodies for different players within the sector, to make sure that the dots are all joined up.
So with that, I'm going to jump in just for a second, because there's a really interesting, there's 2 interesting questions. So my question first is, having worked in different sectors in the UK and internationally, I'm used to seeing sector-wide representation bodies for DE&I areas, if this makes any sense. So, for example, when I worked in the legal sector, there was something called, oh God, I've forgotten the name now, Interlaw. So Interlaw existed as a cross-sector, didn't matter the size of the law firm, but it was an organization that represented the interest of LGBTQ plus individuals. In real estate, they've got something called Freehold. Ginger, is there any recommendations from Equality and Human Rights Commission around any sector-wide bodies that need to exist, because I'm not sure there are any. Or I think there's Women in Care who do something quite amazing, actually. But was there anything that came out of the report around that?
And you're, with such a specific question, you're catching me a little bit off guard here. So
no,
it's good. It's all
come back to us.
It's all good. It's all good. What I don't think we have a specific, I don't think, and I'm gonna do a bit of a caveat as we're live here. I don't think we have, and I'm trying to look. I do actually have our briefing in front of me right now, but I've never been great at multitasking. I don't think we have a specific recommendation about creating a new sector-wide body. Well, we do want, well, for instance, this is slightly different from your question, but we do have a recommendation for BASE, the department BEIS, Business Energy Skills. We do have a recommendation for that department to create a single enforcement body in relation to employment. So that's slightly different to the question that you're asking here. I won't go into a lot of detail about that right now, but what we do recommend is that UK government, and then we also have the same recommendations for Welsh and Scottish governments, do work with stakeholders to create forums in order to address some of the findings that we have had, such as, for instance, in Wales, there is a social care fair work forum. It is addressing some of the issues around terms and conditions and pay. I think it is addressing some of it. It has a number of things on its plate. And I guess EDI issues would well be within their remit, but they have other things within their remit as well. So that's not specific to EDI. So no, I don't think we've recommended a specific policy body, but what we have recommended has to do with public authorities, including governments, take responsibility for sort of bringing key players and stakeholders together to address some of these issues. Sorry, that was a bit long-winded.
It's all right, thank you. Clenton, small versus large, what's your thought process?
My thought process about big versus small is what ties them together should be agile. How agile are being a big organisation or being a small organisation? It's the agile systems that you put in place. That's the policies, procedures, and practices. Then how they are interpreted through the services that you offer. So for me, it's agile, and it's agile working. How do you enable the workforce and your leadership within your organisations? I use the term, how do you move from just knowing around diversity, equality, and inclusion to understanding? So and there's a difference to me. There's a real difference from knowing, the diversity characteristics, and you can tick, and then the equality, and then you tick, and the inclusion that you tick. That's knowing something. Is totally different from understanding something.
So, in order to take everything that we've spoken about today and wrap up, I was scribbling some notes furiously as both of you were talking. So first of all, thank you for your time and involvement in today. Being able to have these very open and sometimes challenging conversations around diversity and equality and inclusion, making sure that we know what's going on, means that we're starting that process and hopefully living that process to get to improvement and to make sure that we're encompassing things. I know there's a couple of questions we didn't get to, but I'm hoping that what we've learned today, and which screams out from what Ginger and Clenton have said, is co-production. I know it's the buzzword of the moment. I know that it's what everyone's focused on, but we're focused on it maybe from a resident perspective or a service user perspective. I think what we take out of what Ginger and Clenton have said is that it's the co-production in developing the initial process. Now, just because you have a process going on at the moment, it doesn't mean that you can't re-review it and learn and update, knowing that the information that we have within our services and organizations today. So first of all, it's about understanding where we are, bringing all of our team in the right way to ensure that they're reflected in our processes, and their lived experiences and their history, their heritage, their cultures are acknowledged and considered and lived. But also this means that they understand what's going on, which means that they understand how to access that support, which is the other key bit that I picked up. And the last one is that they have confidence, that's a new word that I've made, which is comfort and confidence. Guys, write that down. But basically it's comfort and confidence in the process, that when they are uncomfortable and they need support, that they believe that that process is going to ensure that they are fairly treated and treated with the respect and the dignity that they deserve, and should not fear that victimization that we spoke about earlier of raising any concerns. And especially with one of the questions that came in, I noticed about people feeling that as well. So all in all, I guess the word to end on is co-produce. Make sure people are involved in the process. And with that, thank you for being involved in today.
Just another key message for me would be to understand that identity isn't fixed, it's fluid. Our identity, and just remember, because sometimes we've created boxes how we put people in. So, for me, I'm not just a black disabled man. I have, it's the intersectionality that's, I talked about early. It's understanding that to live a good life. And that's all we want. So how do we create the mechanisms that we can hear from the workforce, but also hear from the people who draw on care and support? And the reason I deliberately use that language is language evolves, and we're still using quite dehumanizing language in social care, like service user, client, because it's people who draw on the service that you might offer.
Brilliant.
And
Thank you.
And if I could add just one more leg to both of the things that you all just said, which were so key as well. But another leg of this is a strong framework with really good oversight to make sure that those expectations, and things that are required in law are being met. And I think that there are a lot of opportunities, that are coming up that the Commission is excited to be working with and welcome, which include, the establishment of integrated care systems, but also, the CQC, the Care Quality Commission, single assessment framework, which does include a new quality standard on workforce EDI. But I think there's a lot of, that's it. Thanks.
Everyone, thank you so much for your time. It's so very much appreciated. And goodbye. Enjoy the rest of Professional Care Workers Week.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Goodbye.